teams. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the Luttrell room at County Hall. This meeting is being webcast and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. The agenda pack with papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council's website, the link of which was sent out to members. When you're invited to speak, can you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody who's listening to the meeting so they can identify who is speaking? I have to say I've never actually known that happen. Could be a first if we do. Obviously, this meeting is being recorded. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that all members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all those in finding the appropriate information. I'd also like to welcome our new member, Councillor Barr, and welcome back Councillor Rodriguez after his short sabbatical. And first of all, the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, one of which is the chair, so I'm stepping up to be chair. Do we legally need a vice chair to be appointed for this meeting? Everyone happy to continue without a vice chair and for me to chair the meeting as vice chair? Good, that's great. Any apologies for absence?
Sorry, yeah, thank you, Chair. The apologies for absence are from Councillor Simon Coles, Councillor Simon Carswell, as you've already said, and Councillor Andy Soughton. And we've got Councillor Tony Robbins attending online today.
Fantastic.
Sorry, we've just had apologies from Councillor Tom Power as well, just come through.
And did you list Councillor Carswell? Okay. Moving on swiftly then to minutes of the previous meeting. I assume you've all had time to read the minutes of the previous meeting. Any members got any comments, or if not, is everybody happy to approve those minutes? I assume that's down to members who were there. All those
Chair,
in favour?
I was happy to propose approve.
Seconder? And I was there, so I'm sure I can second that.
You chaired the meetings, Chair.
You chaired the meeting, Chair. Councillor Davies wasn't there. The only person that was there that's here today is Marcus Kravis and Martin Lovell.
That's passed. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Okay, declarations of interest. Any declarations from the floor? Just for clarity and for transparency, obviously it's in my register of interest, but I do hold premises licenses, gambling license, etc. But my interest is no more than anybody else in this room for this agenda item.
Chair, I must declare that I'm a personal licence holder, also named on a premises licence.
Thank you, Tony. In that case, I better declare I've got one. There it is, personal licence holder. There's a personal licence. Okay. So for the minutes, just for the record, Hugh Davis has said he has personal licence. Councillor Murphy has a personal licence. No more? Okay, fantastic. We can move on to then public question time. Do we have any members of the public listed to speak?
No one has registered to speak today, Chair.
Fine. We will now go on to item 5. This I'm going to pass over to John Rendell. And this is licensing subcommittee hearings.
Thank you, Chair. As members of the committee will be familiar, we hold a number of hearings to allow the licensing authority to make decisions on specific cases. So that can be for applications and notices in relation to the Licensing Act 2003 and Gambling Act 2005, but also other matters as well, such as whether or not an individual should be granted a taxi driver license or be issued a vehicle license, various different things. In the case of the Licensing Act and Gambling Act, there are regulations which set out how hearings should be held, and they refer to a place and they refer to a hearing, but those terms aren't defined. As we all know, online meetings became commonplace during the pandemic. There was some emergency legislation which allowed authorities to do meetings online, but it did. There was some scrutiny on the Licensing Act and the Gambling Act because, of course, those words "place" and "hearing" weren't defined, and there was some discussion around, well, you know, is it not the case that those meetings could be done online or people could participate in those remotely anyway? After the pandemic and the end of the emergency legislation, some authorities have continued to allow remote participation, so online participation in hearings for the Gambling Act and Licensing Act, and inevitably there have been some challenges around that. And we've got to the stage now where the courts have actually determined that yes, it's perfectly lawful for parties, so various parties, to participate in Licensing Act and Licensing Act hearings remotely. So there was a specific case that I've outlined in the report, but the principles also apply to Gambling Act because, of course, it's the same. It's the same with the words "place" in the hearing; they're not defined as well. So the courts have ruled that that's lawful. In light of that hearing, we wanted to have some clarity in our constitution and the terms of reference for the Licensing and Regulatory Committee to explain what our preference was. Obviously, we want to be robust. We don't want to invite any challenge to our procedures or anything like that. And following some discussions with governance and within the council, we've decided, in light of the our financial crisis and our green objectives in the council plan, that we felt that we should redraft the terms of reference with a view to our preference being for online hearings. So that's a preference. That's not to say that the default would be for all hearings to be online, but our preference would be to hold them online to obviously avoid the travel and the carbon and monetary costs that go with that. But obviously that in certain circumstances that we would be prepared to have hybrid meetings if there was a particular need. So the recommendation I've prepared as part of the report, it's at Appendix 1. There is you've got the terms of reference for the licensing subcommittee there, and you can see the amendments that are proposed are all in red with some notes. And yes, this report will need to go to Constitution and Governance, and it will need to go full council, but come here today asking for your comments and views. And I will end it there, Chair, and obviously take any questions.
Okay, one question from me before I open the floor, just for clarity, because you said the preference would be online, but then has anyone come up with a system or how you would then decide to actually, no, we don't want an online one, would have a hybrid one? Has anyone thought about that and how that would be dealt?
Yeah, we did discuss that, Chair. So the starting point would be that the arrangements would be made for the hearing to be done hybrid. So we were the governance colleagues would book the room to make sure that there was, we were prepared, but we would send out the information and aim to hold the meeting online. Obviously, if there were any concerns or issues raised by any of the parties that were participating, such as I don't know, them having a poor internet connection or a particular issue with them being engaged in online meetings, then we would obviously, make the arrangements for it to be done both online and in person. So it's a sort of a hybrid format. But there might also be other occasions as well. And I know, Chair, you've sat in on a subcommittee relatively recently for premises in Minehead where there was a lot of public interest, and that would be another situation where we would, I think, very early on decide that that meeting would be done hybrid. So I suppose each case would be judged on its own individual circumstances, and part of that would involve some discussions with the parties that are taking part.
Thank you, John. I will now open it up to the floor. Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple from me. Just on the summary of proposals, point 12. I'm interested just to understand who makes the decision as to whether or not it goes hybrid. Because I'm just thinking the way that planning works, if there is a suggested deferral or whatever, it then goes to the planning chair and an officer to make a decision as to whether or not it does go to a committee. And I'm wondering what the process would be for this, because it's not clear, and I think it probably should be clear in the proposals as who makes those decisions. And also just wondering around the high number of representations. Maybe, I don't know if that's a bit vague or not, I don't know, because what is a high number of representations for a village or a hamlet? 3 or 4 may be a lot, but for a town, 3 or 4 may just be very, very little. So again, maybe having some clarity on that. Otherwise, we don't know what the parameters are, and I think it just makes it a little bit of a grey area.
Chair, if I could just provide a little bit of thought on frequency. Anybody can lodge a formal representation to an application, and subject to it being relevant to the 4 licensing objectives, and it has been received in time, then it comes forward as a formal representation to the application. We don't know effectively until the end of submissions whether an application is going to receive a lot of criticism, comment, representation. So it's quite difficult to answer your question in that regard.
Yeah, just to sort of follow on from that, I think there are certainly applications where the moment they arrive in the inbox, we will know if there's going to be a lot of interest. There's festivals and major events, for instance, do generate a lot of public interest. So I think rather than leave anything to doubt, we would straight from the off there there's a lot of discussion that goes on from the outset. The moment we get a representation, licensing officer contacts governance. There's a discussion there about booking the room, arranging a date. There are notices that need to be sent out. So the discussion begins then. Who decides? I suppose that would be up for discussion between governance and the licensing officer. I suppose we might make a recommendation, but we'd have to agree that. Obviously, at that point, the subcommittee hasn't been appointed, so it wouldn't be possible to engage the chair of the subcommittee then. So it would be a sort of agreement between common agreement between governance and the licensing officer. And high number of representations. It's a fair comment. I think that I suppose it's fair to say that I've left it a little bit vague at the moment because I didn't want to put a particular number on it and then find that we had sort of shot ourselves in the back and we were having lots of hybrid meetings when we otherwise might not have needed them, all the other way around. So I think it's certainly from my perspective, it would be something that we would keep under review. And the good thing is I've been doing licensing a long time, and my team have, and I think we would use our experience, and I like to think we make pretty good judgment on that. But a lot of it will revolve around discussions with the people that are involved, really, to kind of find out how they feel about doing that online.
Yes, sorry, just to feed back in, obviously you as a committee, this reports being brought here for consultation and feedback, you could make proposals to be included in it to go on to Constitution and Governance of Full Council that perhaps the head of licensing with the chair of licensing and regulatory committee make that decision as to what, so they then talk to each other and it's for them to decide. Or you could just leave it that we just wait and see as to what requests come through and we just take it in turn. You could make a suggestion of what you deem relevant as high public interest as to what then would trigger it to go hybrid. So you could feed into it if you have any personal preferences, suggestions to then be taken on further down the report, like pathway.
Marcus, and Marcus first then.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I don't know if it's the right place to ask the question. There's 6 of us in the room on licensing at the moment. I mean, on Somerset West, there was at least, I think there was 10 councillors on licensing, around about that. And I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, hang on, we're covering the whole of Somerset. Shouldn't there be more people in the room? Actually, I don't know if it's the right place, but I'm not quite easy with this because when you look at Somerset as a whole, I don't know what goes on in Frome. I don't know what goes in certain areas. And you know what goes on in Minehead. I know what goes on in Wellington. Diego knows what goes on in Bridgewater. So I just don't understand why we don't have more members of the council sitting on licensing. I don't know how many, because I think there's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's only 10 of us. I don't think that's enough for the. I don't think that's enough for the size of Somerset. And I'm really sorry if that doesn't imply this.
That's not this agenda item.
If I could just come in there as by way of clarification, the size of the licensing committee is set by statute, and it's a maximum of 15. And this council, in setting up this committee, when it first became a unitary, has decided it will follow the maximum.
You'd find that when you do your licensing training, but I had forgotten.
Sorry, Chair, if I can come back. I think Councillor Rodriguez makes a very good point. If there's only 3 people actually deciding on an application, is that benefit for the whole? Because 3, I don't think 3 is enough. That's all I'm making. So yeah.
Again, the size of the subcommittee dealing with applications is set by the statute.
Yeah, I suppose just a word of perhaps reassurance to Councillor Barr, which is that as a team, we're in the sort of same boat. You know, there's a small number of us in licensing, spread across Somerset. You know, a lot of us are used to a historic area. We're perhaps less familiar with the other side of Somerset. So we're all sort of getting used to it and learning about all the different places and things like that. But what we would try and do is provide you with a little bit of context when we write a report for the subcommittees to give you an idea of, okay, what kind of business is actually this person trading as, you know, what's the nature of it, what's the area like, and obviously you'll serve with the papers you know, well in advance by governance. You've got time there to obviously, you know, do some research online and things like that. So I'm personally not overly concerned about that, but you know, appreciate the comment.
On the left of the room, Councillor Davis.
Am I on okay? Thank you. Just what the lead officer has told you is not quite exactly correct, because though they may send out the information, I couldn't find mine, and I never found it until last night, because one lot was sent out on the 4th, I think, of May for 2 items that we were going to be dealing with. And then there was another comment underneath that there was a difficulty on something and it was to follow. And I didn't know what the heck it was that they were even saying, because I didn't have it in front of me. So where we're looking to IT to tell us everything, that's danger. That is danger. What I'm interested in, through you, Chair, is to our licensed chairman, as this is a magistrate's job that we're doing, which we took over, are they doing it? Are their magistrate work by the same idea of not meeting, but being online?
I'll pass that one over to Leslie.
Yes, Chair, there is a now trend in the Magistrates' Court for all their work to be online. For example, they don't accept trial bundles hard copy trial bundles anymore. They expect us to lodge those electronically. So, I mean, their issue is available space. So the judiciary and the magistracy now are all expected to work electronically.
Chair, I don't know whether I was misunderstood there. I mean, are they holding meetings in the open? Not what they're saving and sending, it's the actual meetings where we've got the applicant in front of us.
Chair, the majority of hearings, I say the majority are online, but we have instances where there is where matters come before a judge as opposed to a magistrate, and there is an issue with magistrates with the judge's availability, and he's elsewhere. So in some circumstances, those hearings are remote, but the majority of local hearings are still held face to face.
Can I give you a little bit of actual happenings? I won't name the actual meeting, I won't name the actual people, but we dealt with one. We were there, but they were online, and it got very complicated because the person that we had to deal with disappeared several times because there were local problems in the household, and they had to go and see to them. Now, if you were in court, you wouldn't be doing that, would you? You know, that is not the way to carry on a legal matter. You should be there in front of us. And also, the latest one that we've had last week, we had 3 challenges, fine, but they then turned up on the screen. And without even asking permission and hadn't even asked to speak, they started speaking. And I mean, say that shouldn't be. So I'm frightened that you're going to have fun and games if you're not going to be able to control people unless you could switch them off. But then if we switch them off when we've given them a chance to speak and there's a problem, there's a good chance they can use that they've been shut out of evidence. Do you see what I'm getting at? If you're there in front in the court, that's it. But if you're online and it goes down, you can miss evidence. And that could be against us or against the applicant, who's to say. But we've got to play it right down the middle. And this cost thing is so annoying. I'm prepared not to even claim again because I only started claiming last year. All the years I've been doing council work, I've been all over the place for 20 odd years, and I've never claimed ever. And now all of a sudden, whoa, we've got to stop this. And I'd like to know why we couldn't have a vehicle where we meet here in Taunton and go to the places using the council vehicle, because that's what you've got with your staff to run around in many cases. So why can't we have the same scenario to help us?
Thank you, Hugh. I've got John wanted to just say something, then Martin.
Yeah, just a comment on the so the specific application that Councillor Davies refers to. I'm aware which one that is. I was there myself, and in fairness, that was a meeting which had all been arranged to take place in person, and it was at the very last minute that the person attending on behalf of the premises requested if they could attend online because of I think they said they were caring for a family member. So it was actually the reverse in that situation. Obviously we were happy to oblige because it meant that we didn't then have to run the risk of adjourning the meeting. And yes, we did run in some difficulties, but it did mean we were able to determine the matter that day.
Chair, if I could add a further commentary on that particular application. On that occasion, I sat as the legal advisor to the sub-panel. I was acutely aware that the third party who had requested and was present online was having difficulties with connectivity, to the extent that I was on the verge of speaking to the chair to say we can't continue like this. But as it happened, the third party's connectivity improved and we were able to continue without further interruption. But had we not been able to continue, then my advice to the chair was, in the interest of everybody present, then we ought to adjourn to a date where the matter would continue as a face-to-face hearing.
Thank you. I think my recollection is I think we did actually pause for 10 minutes while they sorted it out. Councillor Lovell.
Just clarification, Chair, are we simply talking about the subcommittee meetings? We're not talking about a meeting like this.
We are purely talking about subcommittee meetings.
And if I may, Chair, purely Licensing Act and Gambling Act ones as well. So anything, any taxi related matters or private hire related matters, this does not apply to that. Those would have to be in person.
Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. So a couple of things, and I'll go back to my original one, if I may. It would be interesting to know if this does go through, because a lot of the benefits is the cost saving to the organisation, to the applicants potentially, if there's any consultants, whatever. It would be good to know kind of a year later what the perhaps cost saving roughly may have been as a result of the change, to see what that benefit was in that sense. And I'm wondering if as this is now, if a solicitor or consultant representing an applicant said to us, I want an in-person hearing, not an online one that you're offering, and let's say they've had no other kind of representation from residents, so you haven't got that reason to go to an in-person meeting, what happens then? Do you do what the solicitor wants, or do you go with the online hearing? Just wondering how that would work. And also, whilst I'm quite happy with the online hearings side of things, I do obviously have concern about members of the public perhaps not being as able as some of our members are to with the ability to use Teams or whatever it is, because we know some of our members struggle with that as well. So just being mindful of that, which no doubt you would be when holding those online hearings. So perhaps the response to those, and I'll go back to then my original point that I made earlier on.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, in a situation like the one you described, what happens if solicitor says, right, I want it in person? I think that we would politely ask for some sort of reasons as to why that would be helpful to them. And I think as long as those reasons felt reasonable, I don't think that's something we would argue with, because again, we do not want to bring any unwelcome scrutiny on our decisions or anything like that. We don't want to run the risk of challenges and whatnot. So I think we would politely sort of ask for some sort of justification, because obviously there's a reason for making this recommendation. And I think, appreciate it's a little bit vague, but as I've said in answering some of the other questions, I think we would use our experience and discuss between us, okay, how do we feel about this? What feels right? And you're right, it comes to the second point. There's, what might be helpful to one sort of party maybe isn't necessarily helpful to others. I think in the experience I've had, you're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't to some extent. There are people who, if you hold the meeting in the daytime, they've got commitments with work or family and things like that, or could be the same in the evening. So I think, again, it would come down to, for a start, if we're talking about members of the public, then clearly, they will have had to have made a relevant representation. If they've made relevant representations and they give a proper reason for requesting it to be held hybrid, because it would, that would still facilitate online, then we would, like I say, we would obviously want to fulfill that. We wouldn't want, again, to be challenged or anything like that. So yeah, appreciate it's a little bit vague, but obviously the idea would be to make the changes to the terms of reference, and clearly there would be a little bit of sort of finding our way, and obviously we would want to have a review further down the line, and yeah, and I agree, it would be interesting to know, obviously later down the line, if we think it's been successful and what we might be able to save.
Thank you, Chair. Can I come back with the last point then? Just going back to the point I made earlier on about the decision for hearings to be held in person rather than online, because I suppose the de facto will be online rather than in person.
Oh, just to clarify, I think it would be hybrid. So if, yeah, beg your pardon.
Just the decision not being made by licensing and governance. I think you referred to licensing governance having a think about which way to go by it. So my comfortable space is the chair of the licensing and regulatory committee being part of that in the same way that planning has that kind of process. And I'd probably make that proposal, that recommendation for that to be included in some sort of wording in this so that it's reflected that way.
Anyone else before I put my 2 pennies worth in?
Yeah. Just to say, I'm on the other meeting that we're going to refer this to governance. So do I walk away from it when we pass this on for the next meeting? That's what we're going to do.
Each say it.
So I'm a member of the governance and community and governance, whatever we call it. Yeah.
I'm sure you'd be allowed to have your view and have your vote at that meeting. I don't think there'd be any reason you couldn't. Is that right? Claire's nodding at me.
Yeah, because ultimately it's full council that makes the decision and you're all members of full council. So yes, you can take part in the debate here at Constitution and Governance and full council and take part in the vote at full council when it goes for decision.
Thank you. So listening to what everyone's said so far is no one seems to be particularly, well, Hugh doesn't seem to be particularly in favour. I get what you've said there about the chair. I do think sometimes that political representation is needed, whether it should be chair or vice chair. So because we could have you never know who's going to be chair in the future or not chair. What my concern is on many levels. I think the word preferred option being online is a little worrying because you're dealing in some cases with people's livelihoods. You could be giving them a license to run a business. You could be taking a license away from them. Them to then not have the option to be in the room, or then that being down to the chair and vice chair. I'd be more comfortable if it was the other way around, where the preferred option was hybrid, but we were able to have remote meetings, because on other times, and I edge towards having hybrid meetings. On other times, there have been times where we've turned up for licensing hearing because people have made representations. Usually, I won't name any parish or town councils. I don't want to get anybody else getting upset about me saying things in meetings. But those representations, as we all know, and I'll talk about my own town council, they can sometimes object to all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons, and they may well be a valid representation. Then suddenly we've got a licensing hearing, when actually they don't even turn up for the licensing hearing, online or in person. And actually we were all totted along to a licensing hearing for a hearing that I think on one occasion the applicant actually brought a solicitor who'd obviously travelled down from up north. I think it was some way, and stayed in a hotel the night. Had the joys of one of our towns in Bridgewater, because it was in Bridgewater. But I think he had a lovely time in Bridgewater for the evening. And why not? Because I love Bridgewater. And then the licence hearing took about 25 minutes. So there was cost there to him. There was a lot of cost to everyone else. So on that occasion, I would have thought that would have been a lot easier remote. But at the same time, if you're then making a decision in advance whether the meeting should be remote or not, are you predetermining yourselves at the meeting? Because you actually say, well, we'll have a remote one because it's not contentious. But I would have thought that solicitor had the option to do it hybrid, and he decided to come in person. And if, bearing in mind the objection and bearing in mind I can understand why he did it. And I think his clients, probably his pockets were maybe big enough. And they didn't mind either, where other clients might have said, no, don't bother coming. But then suddenly are they on the back foot? So I'm really over this. I can't quite get my head around how this would work to be democratic and fair, without having it the other way around, where they could say, yes, we're happy for a remote meeting. Because if I was putting an application that was contentious, and I haven't done one for a long time, you never know what might happen in the future, I would be worried if that I was in the lap of a chair or vice chair and licensing. No offence to that decision being made, whether it was a remote or in-person hearing. You know, sometimes you want to, sometimes even as the applicant, you'd want to be able to look them in the eye. I have actually had a license reviewed once, I think, many years ago. And, you know, that was turn up in person and plead your case, and it needed to be done. I'm not sure whether that would have worked in if it was remote. Again, it would have been probably classed as a contentious application, probably would have ended up at a meeting anyway. But it's how we get that, and I agree totally what you say. Actually, I'd be happy with chair and vice chair, but then what's the parameters for that and how we deal with that? And I see that Leslie's got a hand poised on the button, and Councillor Murphy would say something. So I'll shut up for a while, and then I'll pass over to.
I had my first experience of being on a panel with Hugh and the chairman recently by default, because I had misread the list of participants, and I'd come across one that did not include me, and I mistakenly thought this was the case until I got a phone call saying, you are on the team, don't be mistaken, you're on the team, but we'll do it remotely. So I sat remotely and listened carefully to what was going on. And in some respects, I thought it was quite interesting from the point of view that it's not, I mean, once you are given the guidance that you're given on the actual presentation, and you have a legal person there in the room, I think it works perfectly well. It worked perfectly well for me, because in my opinion, I wasn't making a judgment based on the personality of the person who was making the presentation. It's got nothing to do with that. I wasn't making, you know, any judgment on their lives or their relationships or anything, just on the facts that were presented to me at the time. Now, in this case, it was a small bar that was in a lineup of, you remember that, Hugh? A lineup of terraced houses, and the back of the place had a garden with a fence. And they were concerned that people were smoking or not smoking. There was some noise or whatever, maybe personal disturbance to the local. But they've been doing this for a long time. And here they were asking if they could have a license to serve drinks, as well as serving coffees and teas and sandwiches and what have you. Now, I couldn't judge. We're not asked to judge that they might go out and sell it to somebody who wants to do it differently. We can't judge that. We can only judge on the facts that are given to us at the time. And in that case, I'm beginning to think that this idea, and I heard the chairman say that he was concerned that the proposal is for online hearings to be licensed authorities' preferred format. To that end, officers will make arrangements for hearings to be online. I mean, I think we are witnessing here progress. We're witnessing here the way we go forward. And if we try and say, for example, that, you know, we all need to be together and have a coffee and smell the person. Forgive me saying that, the expression is, it's not nice, but I'm just being silly. And smell the whole atmosphere and be together. I'm not convinced that that's the way forward. We are talking about a slimmed down council. And if it's possible, I mean, I personally think as long as we can gauge whether the conditions, whether the legalities, whether the effect that it might have on other people in the area is we're able to judge that, the decision can be made. I'm not going to say any more, Mr. Chairman. I sound as if I'm rabbiting him on for no reason, but I think personally, this is genuinely the way forward.
Leslie.
There is currently a mechanism within the legislation, within the hearing regulations, which requires anybody, be that an applicant or their representative, their solicitor representative, or a third party local resident, to provide notice to the licensing authority of their intention to attend a hearing which has been convened. So that will give an indication of what the interest is. And it may well be that a lot of solicitors, national solicitors working in the national licensing regime who represent the larger of the applicants. I mean, rather than faced with a trundle down here from the north or vice versa, it may suit them to go online. But as I say, there is a mechanism within the legislation to enable the licensing authority to gauge the level of interest in having a hearing. And so, strictly speaking, those that haven't provided a formal notice have no say. Yeah.
John?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to pick up on one of the comments that you made, really, which is you might wish to, sort of with your recommendation to Constitution and Governance, perhaps pick up on review applications specifically, because you mentioned, you know, when licenses and livelihoods are taken away, obviously a review can have some pretty hefty outcomes, such as suspension of a license, revocation of a license, and so on. So you may feel that actually that's something you specifically want identified as being something that would always be hybrid.
Councillor Barr.
Thank you, Chair. For me personally, if it's a disciplinary, I do think it should be in person, because then you can look at that person in the eye. If you do it online, you might have somebody in the background on the other side of the screen holding up notes and trying to get you out of it. So for me, disciplinaries or a loss of a license should be done in person. If it can't be done in person, then yeah, all right. I've listened to a lot of the arguments today, and it does actually make this legislation does make common sense. It's a good thing to do. But just for me, if you've got a taxi driver who's been accused of something, all right, taxi license, sorry.
No.
This one come in.
That's taxi licensing won't come into it.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, just coming back there, because I mean, it did the actual court ruling, or don't you just love the judiciary? I mean, there was no definition of what a place was, and you know, shoddy draftsmanship in the Licensing Act. Who knew it was in there? Well, actually, it is. What's the difference? I'd argue that Teams isn't a place. It might be a space, but it's not a place. But I'll leave that one for the lawyers and where we are. What I would say about the interesting what was just said then, well, you know, about licenses being reviewed. Ironically, the last license that we reviewed, they weren't in the room. Although they were entitled to be in the room, they weren't in the room. And the one before that, again, for various reasons, didn't end up being in the room. So that's interesting. But I think the ability, but it's that word preferred, where I'm quite happy for the ability to have remote meetings. That's my concern. Councillor Rodriguez's proposal of there should be some political decision making in there, whether it be the chair and vice chair, like in planning, I think should be included. It's just whether, Martin's got his hand up, whether we should have the word preferred or we have the ability instead.
Chair, I mean, I think that most of the time this obviously makes sense. I'm trying to think of a subcommittee hearing I've been on that couldn't have comfortably happened online. I think we should avoid this thing political. I mean, what we want is some point it's got to pass the view of elected members, is what I think we need to be clear about. And I would thought that point is a recommendation from the officers to chair and vice chair of this committee to say, look, we think we are in this situation. Are you happy that this goes to, do you have a view about whether this goes to hybrid or not? And that the at least elected member representation has been thrown into the pot. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Hugh. Sorry to let this go on a bit, but I think it's quite an important issue. So,
Chair, when it becomes to decision time, how do we do it then? If we're the three on it, how do we do it when we're miles away from each other? I know we can talk on this, but that I've got to learn for a start. And how good is that? Can people hear what we're saying? Because as you know, we've had some touchy moments when we've had to explain things quite in plain language to each other.
Okay, if you don't mind me, I mean, as I said, we all managed in COVID when we had to. What I would say is, though, that I think the discussion between the panel and the legal officer probably isn't, or the discussion between the panel making the final decision probably won't be an issue because there's just us three on the room. I think one of the problems I found, I substituted for one once, and I did find, now whether that was because it was a setup of the online being in Shepton, it was very difficult to feel part of that meeting being online. And obviously you've always got the problem of if you're not in the room, there's always distractions happening as hard as you try. And I was very good that day and tried to make sure that there weren't any distractions. But I did find it very difficult luckily I was only a sub and I wasn't making that decision, but I found that very difficult. Now that could have been, if it had been a different online system and say a better owl or something like that, it may have worked better. So ironically, we could end up spending some money making sure we have better online systems.
Chair, I just wanted to share with you because I actually observed part of a subcommittee hearing the other day just to offer a little bit of moral support to someone in the team and to just see how it's getting on. And I did know that actually it was quite tricky at times to hear some of the speeches. So I, probably second your comment there about it difficult feeling part of the meeting. But actually that was because that was a hybrid one, obviously. And I think if everyone was online, you wouldn't necessarily then have the difficulty picking up the speech because, everyone would be talking to their computers rather than sat away from the microphone. So from experience and in my personal view, actually that would have been a time when it would have been better if everyone had been online like me. Just an observation.
Almost like if you agreed with this, it's done and dusted and it never can go back to how it was before. And that's possibly something that's a little bit too much to think about. Looking at it, it's a pity that they worded it the way they've done. Putting the preferred before everything else. If they'd said, for example, if they'd used the word acceptable, it would make it easier for everybody. In other words, if they'd said, the proposal is for online hearings to be the licensing authorities accepted format, or it would be the proposal is for hearings to be considered to be acceptable. That would be interesting because you then see if it was acceptable but in this case we should be looking at whether there's significant interest, whether there's significant public interest. In other words, you try and bring the evidence for a full hearing to the fore. And maybe, Mr. Chairman, you could think about that and lead us in that way, because it may be that the weight that comes out of this discussion with this committee is that preferred thing is a bridge too far to start with. There you go.
I've got Claire with her hand up again.
Thank you. Just to come back into appease some concerns, obviously Councillor Davies mentioned about concern of online and the public hearing. We've already discussed as officers that we would set up a separate call for councillors and the legal officer to adjourn to prevent any likelihood of any member of the public hearing what you were discussing in your adjournment where you're debating whether to approve or, refuse applications. So we are already looking at those types of measures. I don't want to use the word fortunately because there's nothing fortunate about a global pandemic, but COVID did provide us with those lessons learned. We learned a lot from holding meetings online because we were doing it for, well over a year. And so at district, we did carry on using online methods for these types of hearings because they proved successful, obviously with the backup that if somebody did have issues that we could hold it in a hybrid manner. So we are fortunate in the position we've learned a lot about online meetings and managing those. So we've got that experience behind us. As for a reason that has been sort of overlooked in this, I would say, is we have signed up as a council to climate change and supporting that. Just want to reiterate that we're one of the reasons why we're proposing this is because people are having to travel all over the county for what could potentially just be an hour meeting, but their travel time might very well be an hour and a half, emissions, etc., feeding into that climate emergency. So that's one of the reasons that I just wanted to highlight as well. And obviously, finally, Councillor Murphy, your point on the word being used. Obviously, it's not for you to decide on this report today, but you can propose to Constitution and Governance that you would like for the word not to be preferred. You'd prefer the wording to be this, this, and this.
Any views on what the word should be? Trying to choose a word by committee. Yeah, Councillor Rodriguez.
Not on the word, but just something that Leslie mentioned earlier about if someone wants to make representation, there was something in some sort of legislation or whatever it is that says that they can or they could do within a certain time. Just
Yeah, within the hearing regulations, anybody who wishes to speak at a subsequent licensing hearing is required to give formal notice to the licensing authority of that intention. So when you get, and they forgive me, I can't remember the period of time in which they have to do it, but you get to the cut-off time, you could be reviewing then who has, given notice to attend. And if you've had no notices, I think it would be fair to assume that there is an interest in holding the meeting remotely. And then if you've had a representation for a hybrid, somebody wants to come along, you're then considering whether or not to hold the hybrid meeting. And then, there could be the consultation with the licensing manager and the chair and vice chair of this committee as to whether that request was going to go ahead.
great. So the reason for me asking, Chair, was just to see if there was enough time between that period of kind of wanting to say something, closing, and agenda item publication of agenda going to councillors, whether there's enough period of time for that to happen. That was my reason for asking.
I think from memory it would be 10 working days, because the first thing that happens is, well, I won't go right to the very beginning obviously, but the licensing authority will give every party, the applicant, the people that made representations, they will receive a notice from us which will set out the date and the time of the meeting, where it's going to take place, or the space even, and all the relevant rules and the procedure that applies to that meeting. And it will also tell them that they are required to give notice back to us, which is what Leslie was referring to. Yes, their deadline for responding to the notice of hearing, in most cases, because there are we generally think of the bigger applications for grants and variations of licenses, but we might also be talking about temporary event notice or something smaller where there is less of a lead-in. But generally it's 10 working days, because then the authority then has to publish the report and agenda 5 working days before. Is that right, Claire? Yep.
Councillor Murphy.
I'd just like to say that what Claire has just said is repeated on 3 or 4 different subject headings. It's on page 14 of the agenda, of the second part. That the actual agenda, page 14, and it's sections 13, 14, 15, 16, and it finishes by saying, whilst hearings could continue to be routinely held at council offices, face to face with the option to participate online, this would result in avoidable environmental and financial impacts, which is exactly what Claire has just said. And so they're trying to, and when you go backwards, holding hearing online supports a greener, more sustainable, blah, blah, blah. So if you're going to change things, to say to them as a recommendation that we use the word, for example, attractive, more acceptable, or whatever, it's acceptable to go online, but it would have to be on the conditions that we look at the following things. You'd have to make sure that you covered those different things. So they are really putting this in place here. You're quite right, Mr. Chairman. I didn't read those last ones until I read it now. But when I read it, I see, okay, it says the proposal is preferred. And then having stated that, they go on to say page number 13, it's going to happen. Number 14, in advance of hearings, blah, blah, blah. And then number 15, it's got to be right because it will save us a lot of money and save environmental problems. So you'd have to make sure you put something in as a proposal, as Claire suggests, to the committee. I'm just trying to help, that's all. It's about trying to say we would like this to be further discussed at the Constitution and Governance, I would suggest.
Chair, if I could help you, I've actually turned now to the specific piece of legislation which requires notice. It's Section 8 of the hearing regulations. A party shall give to the authority within the period of time provided for in these provisions a notice stating whether he intends to attend or be represented at the hearing, or whether he considers the hearing to be unnecessary. There are various so in the case of some applications, 1 day's notice, at least 1 day's notice can be given. In the case of a review of a premises licence, there shall be no later than 2 working days before the day of the first day on which the hearing is to be held. But generally, notice has to be given no later than 5 working days before the first day upon which the hearing is to be held. So that ties in with the publication requirements, with the agenda going out to members 5 working days before a hearing.
Councillor Rodriguez.
Thank you. So just on that point, and I'm just thinking about my proposal to have the chair or vice chair jointly make that decision of a licensing manager or whatever. If it's no later than 5 working days, that's the same time at which the agenda has to go out. And I'm just wondering if that's enough time, therefore, for the manager with the chair and vice chair to make a decision before the agenda is published. That's all like a practical kind of thing, really.
Go on then, Claire.
What we could do as part of the procedure of setting up a subcommittee is pencil in some time with the chair and vice chair on that final deadline day, so that we could then hold it, just generally have a phone call with them to go, right, we've had so many representations come in, you know, and just to actually have a in the moment conversation. If we wouldn't leave it to emails, etc., because obviously we're aware people have lives and you're not always checking your inboxes. But yeah, it could be just something that the clerk will, or myself or John, whoever, just pencils that in, just to say to Simon and Marcus that, you know, we're going to need to have a chat on this date because that's when these notices end and we need to publish. So we could have a very quick decision.
Where do you want to go?
Councillor Rodriguez has made a proposal, I think.
That's why I was just looking at Councillor Rodriguez to see what the proposal was and whether
I'm
we had
happy
anything
to
about the
propose that recommendation to Constitution and Governance.
Well, there's been no hands from anyone online, so.
Chair, so my proposal to Constitution and Governance would be to consider the decision whether or not to be held online be made in discussion with the licensing manager or person, whoever it may be, and the chair and vice chair of licensing and regs, but also noting the whatever Claire said about the timeline and having to make that prompt decision within 5 working days or whatever it was you said. So perhaps someone else can word that to better than I can.
Is anyone very good at reading back a transcript immediately to know what Claire said?
This doesn't have to be verbatim because obviously this isn't going as a recommendation. This will be given as feedback to the Constitution and Governance and then on to full council. So we can add that in the notes that will be taken. And obviously when John introduces this as Constitution and Governance, he will highlight that to the committee, the feedback that you've given. So we can incorporate that. Do not fear.
Yeah, it was just a point to say that you know, I think there are inevitably going to be circumstances like we've already touched on, where I think we will recognise from the very outset that it's going to need to be a hybrid format, such as a festival or something like that. So you know, we could, you know, I like Claire's suggestion, but we could have even decided, you know, much earlier than that. Yeah, you know, maybe from the outset. We just think we're gonna decide that now. Yeah, it's just a point on that.
Councillor Lovell.
Well, I'm just questioning whether we need to have absolutely every subcommittee hearing referred to chair and vice chair. I mean, can't we just leave it to the ones that the officers decide should be are likely to be controversial and pass those by them? It's just there's going to be so many. There's going to be a lot of contact required with chair and vice chair when it's actually, if you assume that online will be okay, it won't be a problem.
Yeah, I can see where Councillor Lovell's coming from. I think so with Councillor Rodriguez's suggestion, it was that meetings that would be online. So that's almost like treating the online ones as the exception and those having to be agreed. Whereas I think if it was the other way around and it was deciding with the chair and vice chair that which ones were going to be hybrid, because I think the reason for the use of the preferred being the word in the report and the terms of reference was because we wanted to be doing more online hearings, and we knew that if we didn't set it up in that way, and that we needed people really to have a reason to request not to do one online. We didn't want to gear it any other way, otherwise we might just end up doing hybrid ones forever. So I think we wanted to sort of lean it more towards the online, with hybrid being the exception. So I don't know whether Councillor Rodriguez feels about his recommendation, but it being that decision to make it hybrid being the one that's discussed between the licensing manager and chair and vice chair. I don't know.
Well,
I think that would then address the point that Councillor Lovell's made.
my only comment as someone who's attended a few licensing hearings is that we don't actually have that many. There's a few, but there's not that many that actually end up at a hearing. And I'd say it gets that to member involvement. So who is actually, with the licensing committee, and we're the people who would sit on a panel. So it's that member involvement, and I think that's what I like about your proposal. Now I understand what you say there, but I don't think it would be that difficult for when there's a panel needed for the chair and vice chair to get together with. Because the fundamental, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the environment and costs and money, but we've got a duty to not only the applicant, but the people who may not be in favour of the application as well. And that's where I think our priority is. So is Councillor Murphy. We're going past an hour.
It does say, Chair, well, I remember to switch my thing on. In section 18, it actually does say the proposal, there has been no specific consultation. The proposal provides for discussions to be had in individual cases to ensure that parties, quote, and protected groups, well, it's actually, yes, protected groups are not disadvantaged. So it falls right into your caring look at this thing. I mean, obviously, they're trying to say everything they can, and I think the proposal's right. I'd support the proposal for sure.
Sorry, it was just another thought that occurred to me, and that was just I suppose a hypothetical scenario to pose, and that is, would based on the sort of suggestions that we've had, in a case where we have a license application and we've given notice to the applicant and the parties, in that it explains that the hearing is going to be online unless they have a particular reason to request otherwise. If we don't have any feedback or any objections to that per se, do we, in one of these suggestions, we would still then have to agree that with the chair and vice chair. And I think, again, I just wonder if it's better, therefore, for it to be decided if it needs to be hybrid, it's the other way around. Otherwise, we may end up having meetings and discussions to agree things when actually everyone else is quite already happy with what's been proposed.
Or they think they are because they're not experienced in licensing hearings. I mean, I'm sorry, you haven't even, I would just like to say, welcome to licensing. This meeting is actually so far 6 times longer than the last one. And so you have come to the longest licensing regular meeting for a while. But then, as I said, we are dealing with licenses that depend on people's livelihoods. So it's worth the conversation, and I think it's been a very valid and interesting conversation. So, with bearing in mind that is that proposal, your head's fried, can we move on? We would. Do we have an agreement? I think there's no doubt that we all, I think, probably understand what we're saying to governance, but we just want to make sure that is what gets there. That's no disrespect to anybody, just things don't get.
Clarification, Chair. All items get referred to Chair and Vice Chair. Is that what we're saying?
That's what that's my opinion.
Happy to support that. If it's felt that it's practical and you're saying we don't get that many, then let's do that.
It's a 5 minutes team call. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 10-minute team call. We're not asking to have that in person.
Chair, factor in this. We're political, and you're going to have the same people making the decision, the same colour people. It does matter. Of course it does. No. That if they're in situ and they're running the committee, so be it. But if you're going to give the issue to those two people to decide, we already know the decision. You know, I was on one recently where we saw something that was happening. I brought it up to the chair, and they agreed with me, and we overturned what was happening. But I was really pleased about that, because when you've got a monopoly, like where we go now in this committee's in the whole of the Somerset, we're now run by a new regime. Good luck to them, and so on. But when you've got an overwhelming majority, that's it. So if somebody decides they're going to go that way, you're all going to follow straight. You're not going to have genuine thoughts on the matter. I don't think you've got to have somebody from another party in the discussion.
Sorry, I had Councillor Rodriguez before Councillor Barber. I would say that subcommittees are not political, and it is often who happens to be able to attend. And I don't think this committee is thought of as political as well.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll echo. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to reassure Councillor Davies, where we're saying the chair and vice chair will make the decision, that's on whether to hold it hybrid or online only. It's not for them to make the decision for the outcome of the subcommittee.
Okay, well, I believe it or not, I'm now getting to the point where I'd like to, I think we draw this to a conclusion. So Councillor Rodriguez and Councillor Barr, then we'll make a decision. And
Chair, I was just going to echo your words. I don't think it is party political. The confidence that I'd give the chair and vice chair of licensing and regulatory is the same that I give the confidence to chair and vice chair of my planning committee. That's not political decisions they make. So I'll just echo those words, please. Thank you.
For me personally, we're all here to do what's best for the public at the end of the day. And that's what it comes down to. It's not political. It's what's right for the public. And I have faith in everyone in this room that they will do what's right by the public.
so that said, we got a proposal. You want to repeat it? Has somebody got it? Or you don't think we do, but I think is anybody, well, all those in favour? Anyone against? No. Thank you. Well, I'm quite proud with an hour and 10 minutes on that one. Have I missed? Oh. Oh, there you go. That's the end of it. So with that, no other further comments. Is there anything else I'll need to do before I close the meeting? No. Don't think we have any other business on the agenda, do we?
That to the agenda.
We don't have any other business. But you could always let us know beforehand and we can add it to the agenda.
Chair, can I just confirm Councillor Robbins is still online and he said he's in favour as well?
Thank you, Councillor
Right.
Robbins. With that, it's there.
He's still there.
Thank you. With that, thank you, Councillor Murphy. We will close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance and thank you for your debate.